"Sir, you need to get up now." The voice cracked across the cabin like a whip, and every head in first class turned at once. Marcus Reynolds didn't move. He sat with his hands folded loosely in his lap, his eyes fixed calmly on the woman standing over him, blocking the aisle light with her rigid shoulders, and her badge that read Senior Flight Attendant. Her name was Denise Coleman. 41 years old, 17 years with Horizon Atlantic Airlines, and in all that time she had built herself a reputation. The kind of reputation people whispered about, but never wrote down. She had a talent for deciding, in about 4 seconds, who belonged where. And the moment Marcus had stepped through the first-class curtain that morning at Hartsfield-Jackson, she had already made her decision about him. "I think there's been a mix-up," Denise said, her smile stretched thin and cold. "This cabin is reserved. Why don't we get you settled back in coach, and I'll see if I can find you a complimentary drink for the trouble." Marcus reached into his jacket, unhurried, and produced his boarding pass. Seat 2A, first class, Chicago-bound. He held it out to her without a word. She didn't even look at it. "Ma'am, it's Miss Coleman," she snapped, cutting him off before he could finish. "And I don't need to see a piece of paper to know you're not supposed to be sitting here." A younger flight attendant leaned in from across the aisle, grinning like he'd just been let in on a joke. His name tag read Tyler. "Yeah, man," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Coach is that way. You can't just walk up here and expect nobody to notice." The cabin had gone silent. Phones tilted up. A woman, 2 rows back, lowered her magazine an inch, just enough to watch over the top of it. Nobody said a word in Marcus's defense. Nobody ever did, not at first. That silence, that specific cowardly silence, was a sound he had heard his entire life, and it never got easier to sit inside of. He kept his voice level. "I paid for this seat. I'm not moving." Denise's jaw tightened. She turned, just slightly, toward the 2 passengers now standing behind her in the aisle, a couple in their 50s, dressed in the kind of expensive casual that only comes from old money. The man had a platinum medallion card pinched between 2 fingers like it was a badge of office. "These are our diamond members," Denise said, gesturing at them, as though that settled everything. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield have been flying with us for over a decade. They were told this seat would be available." Gregory Whitfield gave Marcus a look that lasted half a second too long, the kind of look that measured a man and found him wanting before a single word had been exchanged. "No offense," he said, in a tone that promised offense, "but there's clearly been some kind of error. I'm sure you understand." Marcus did understand. He understood better than any of them could imagine. "There's no error," he said quietly. "Check the manifest." "I don't need to check anything," Denise said, her voice rising now, sharp enough that people 3 rows back stopped pretending not to listen. "I've been doing this job 17 years. I know what a legitimate boarding pass looks like, and—" She snatched the pass from his hand and flipped it over, scanning it with theatrical suspicion. "This looks printed at home. We've had this exact thing happen before. Just last spring, a man walked on with a fake pass out of Miami and tried this same routine. That's not what's happening here. Sir, I am not going to argue with you in front of my passengers." Denise's tone had dropped into something colder, something practiced, the voice of a woman who had learned exactly how to sound reasonable while being anything but. "You have 2 options. You can walk to the back of this aircraft on your own, with your dignity intact, or I can call for assistance, and it will be a lot less pleasant. Your choice." Marcus felt the old, familiar heat rise in his chest. Not panic, never panic, but the low, controlled burn of a man who had spent his whole life being underestimated and had learned, the hard way, exactly how to sit with that feeling instead of letting it run him. He breathed once, slow and deliberate. "I'm not moving," he said again, "and I'd like to speak to your captain." Denise's eyes flared. She turned on her heel and marched toward the cockpit, muttering something to Tyler that Marcus didn't catch, but could guess the shape of. Behind her, the Whitfields settled uneasily into the row across the aisle, whispering to each other, throwing quick, embarrassed glances his way. Not embarrassed for him. Embarrassed by the delay. A security officer appeared next. Karen Sullivan, mid-30s, radio clipped to her shoulder, hand resting near her belt like she expected trouble. She stopped at the end of the row and looked down at Marcus with the flat, practiced neutrality of someone who had already been told what to think before she arrived. "Sir, I'm going to need you to gather your things. I have a valid ticket," Marcus said. "Seat 2A. I am not disrupting this flight. I am sitting in the seat I paid for." "That's not what I've been told." "Then you've been told wrong." Karen's hand drifted an inch closer to her belt, and for the first time, something flickered behind Marcus's calm. Not fear, but a kind of tired, bitter recognition. He had seen this exact moment before, in different airports, different cities, different uniforms. The same script over and over, no matter how much he had built, no matter how far he had come. "Sir, I'm going to give you one warning," Karen said. "Either you comply, or we escort you off this aircraft." That was when the cockpit door opened, and Captain David Ellison stepped into the cabin. He was younger than Marcus expected for a captain, maybe mid-40s, silver already threading through dark hair, his uniform pressed to a precision that suggested a man who liked things orderly. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. Denise's crossed arms, Karen's hand on her belt, the Whitfields hovering like vultures, and Marcus sitting perfectly still in the middle of it all, radiating a calm that didn't match the chaos around him. "What's the situation here?" Ellison asked. "This passenger is refusing to vacate a seat that's been reassigned to our Diamond members," Denise said quickly, before anyone else could speak. "He's presented a boarding pass that doesn't check out, and he's becoming argumentative." "I have not raised my voice once," Marcus said, still seated, still calm. "I would like that noted." Ellison held out his hand. "May I see your pass?" Marcus handed it over without hesitation. Ellison studied it. Really studied it, turning it over, checking the barcode against a handheld scanner. Tyler produced with visible reluctance. The scanner beeped green. Ellison's brow furrowed. He looked up. "This is a confirmed first-class ticket, seat 2A. His eyes moved to Denise. "Why wasn't this verified before we got to this point?" "I've seen fake passes before," Captain, Denise said, an edge of defensiveness creeping into her voice now. "We don't have time to individually scan every." "You have a scanner in your hand right now," Ellison said. Took 4 seconds. A ripple of something, embarrassment maybe, or the first cold touch of consequence, passed over Denise's face before she smoothed it away. "With respect, Captain, we also have 2 Diamond Tier members standing here who were promised this exact seat by ground staff. There's clearly some kind of double booking, and I was simply trying to resolve it quickly, before it became a scene." "It's already a scene," Ellison said flatly. He turned back to Marcus. "Sir, I apologize for the confusion. Your seat is confirmed. There won't be any further issue." "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. And then, after a pause just long enough to make it clear he meant every word, "I'd like everyone who was involved in this to remain on this flight until we land." "All of them." Denise blinked. "Excuse me, you heard me. Sir, I don't know who you think you are, but—" "You don't," Marcus said, and for the first time something steel-edged slid into his voice, quiet but unmistakable. "That's exactly the problem." He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a second card, not a boarding pass this time, but a small black corporate badge, embossed with gold lettering that caught the cabin light. Denise leaned in despite herself, and the color drained from her face in real time as she read it. "Marcus Reynolds, Executive Officer, Reassign, Atlantic Airlines." The cabin, which had been murmuring, went dead silent. Somewhere near the back, a phone camera, already recording, because someone was always recording, tilted forward to catch the moment Denise Coleman's mouth fell open and nothing came out. Tyler started, then stopped, his earlier smirk collapsing off his face like a building losing its foundation. I own this airline, Marcus said, quiet as ever. Every seat on it, every uniform on it, and for the last 20 minutes, I have watched 2 members of my own staff decide, without checking a single fact, that a black man in a suit could not possibly belong in seat 2A. I watched you hand my seat to strangers because they had a platinum card, and I didn't look the part. I watched you call me a liar to my face before you bothered to scan my ticket. Denise's mouth worked soundlessly. Mr. Reynolds, I had no idea. That's exactly the problem, Marcus said again, and this time his voice carried down the length of the cabin. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with basic respect. You needed to know that I was a paying passenger with a valid seat. That should have been enough. It would have been enough for anyone who didn't look like me. Gregory Whitfield, who had gone very quiet, cleared his throat. Look, I think there's been a genuine misunderstanding here, and— Sit down, Mr. Whitfield, Marcus said, not unkindly, but with a finality that ended the sentence before it could continue. You'll get your refund. That's not what this is about. Captain Ellison stood very still, watching the moment unfold with the particular stillness of a man, recalculating everything he thought he understood about his morning. Mr. Reynolds, he said carefully, how do you want to proceed? We fly to Chicago, Marcus said, on schedule. No one is removed from this aircraft, but when we land, Miss Coleman and Mr. He glanced at the younger attendant's badge. Mr. Brooks will report to my office. Today. Denise's hands were trembling now, the practiced coldness of 20 minutes ago, replaced by something closer to panic. Mr. Reynolds, please. I've worked here for 17 years. I have a family. You should have thought about that before you decided I didn't belong in my own airline, Marcus said. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. Sit down, Miss Coleman. We have a flight to finish. The rest of the flight passed in a strange electric hush. Passengers who had said nothing 20 minutes earlier now leaned toward each other, whispering. Some visibly furious on Marcus's behalf, a few filming quietly, careful not to be noticed. Denise stood at the front of the cabin for most of the flight, pale and silent, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Tyler disappeared into the galley and didn't come out until the seatbelt sign chimed for landing. Marcus sat in 2A, exactly where he had always belonged, and looked out the window at the clouds sliding past, his face unreadable, his mind already 3 steps ahead. By the time the aircraft touched down at O'Hare, the video was already loose in the world. A passenger 3 rows back, a college student named Priya, who had filmed the whole confrontation on her phone, hands shaking with the kind of fury that comes from watching injustice up close, had posted 11 minutes of footage to social media before the plane had even reached the gate. She hadn't planned for it to spread. She just wanted a record, in case anyone tried to claim it hadn't happened the way it happened. By the time Marcus walked off the jet bridge, his phone was already buzzing itself off the surface of his palm. He didn't look at it. Not yet. He walked, flanked by 2 members of his executive team who had rushed to the gate the moment word reached headquarters through a terminal that had started to notice him. Not for his face, which most people didn't recognize, but for the low murmur of recognition rippling out from anyone who'd already seen the clip. Someone pointed. Someone else raised a phone. Sir. Michelle Turner, his head of communications, fell into step beside him, tablet already lit up with notifications. It's everywhere. 40 minutes and it's already past 2 million views. The hashtag's trending. Seat of power. Marcus, people are furious. In a good way, for you. And Coleman? Suspended, pending review, the moment corporates saw the footage. Legal wants a statement from you by end of day. PR wants one sooner. Michelle glanced at him sideways. How do you want to handle it? Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the terminal crowd part around him without quite knowing why. Call an emergency board meeting, he said finally. Tonight. I want everyone there. Not a phone call. In person. Tonight? Marcus, half the board is scattered across 3 time zones. Then they'll fly, he said. On my airline. Funny how fast people move when it's their own seat on the line. The boardroom on the 40th floor of Horizon Atlantic's Chicago headquarters had windows that looked out over the lake, glass walls polished to an unnatural clarity, and a long obsidian table that had hosted 100 quiet, comfortable decisions about routes and fleets and quarterly earnings. It had never hosted anything like what was about to happen inside it. By 8 o'clock that evening, 9 board members sat around that table, faces tight with the particular anxiety of people who had spent the day watching a crisis metastasize in real time across every screen in the building. Charles Winters, the board's longest-serving member, a silver-haired man who had helped take the airline public 2 decades earlier, sat at the far end, arms crossed, jaw set. Marcus walked in last. He didn't sit at the head of the table. He stood. "I assume you've all seen the video," he said. A murmur of confirmation, a few nods. Nobody wanted to be the one to say it out loud first. "Then you know what happened," Marcus continued. "You know that a passenger, a paying, ticketed, first-class passenger, was accused of fraud, threatened with removal, and nearly had security called on him because a member of my staff decided, on site, that he didn't belong in that seat. You know that 2 of my most loyal Diamond members stood there and let it happen, because it benefited them. And you know that it took me pulling out a corporate badge to make anyone believe I had a right to be sitting where I was sitting." He let the silence sit. Nobody filled it. "What you may not know," he went on, "is that this wasn't the first complaint like this. It's the 14th this year alone. 14. Every single one filed by a passenger of color. Every single one quietly settled, quietly buried, quietly forgotten, because it was cheaper and easier than actually looking at what's broken in this company." Charles Winters shifted in his seat. "Marcus, I understand you're upset, rightfully, but we've always had a zero-tolerance policy on this. If there were 14 complaints, that's an HR failure, not a... It's a culture failure." Marcus cut in, and his voice, for the first time all day, rose, not to a shout, but to something hard and unmistakable, a tone that filled the room and left no space for argument. Zero-tolerance policies don't mean anything if the people enforcing them decide who deserves tolerance in the first place. Denise Coleman didn't wake up this morning and invent prejudice. She's been carrying it for 17 years, in a company that trained her, promoted her, and never once made her answer for how she treated the people in her care. That's on her. But it's also on every single person in this room who let it keep happening, because the complaints never made it past a legal settlement. Rachel Nguyen, Marcus's chief of staff, stepped forward and set a folder on the table in front of him. "Full footage is uploaded and preserved," she said quietly. "Legal and PR have both been briefed. The story's not going away, Marcus. It's growing. People want to know what the company does next." Marcus opened the folder, scanned it once, then closed it again and looked back up at the board. "Here's what we do next," he said. "Effective immediately, every flight attendant, gate agent, and customer-facing employee in this company goes through a mandatory, independently audited bias and de-escalation training program. Not a 2-hour seminar, not a checkbox. A real program with real accountability, with real consequences for failing it. That'll cost." One of the board members began. "I don't care what it costs," Marcus said flatly. "I built this airline on the idea that anyone who could afford a seat could sit in it without being treated like a threat. If that idea isn't true anymore, then I've failed at the one thing I actually set out to do, and no amount of quarterly profit is going to make up for that." He turned to Charles. "I also want a full independent audit of every discrimination complaint filed against this company in the last 5 years. Every single one. I want to know how many were settled quietly, how many employees involved are still working here, and how many of them are still in customer-facing roles. Charles's face had gone pale. Marcus, some of those settlements have confidentiality clauses. Then we renegotiate them, Marcus said. Every person who was made to feel like they didn't belong on my airline deserves to know that something changed because of what happened to them. Not just an apology nobody reads. Real change. Silence again, heavier this time. A few board members exchanged glances, the particular look of people recalculating how much trouble they were actually in. And Coleman? Someone finally asked. Brooks? Terminated, Marcus said. Effective tonight. Not because I want revenge. I don't. But because a company that lets its worst instincts wear a uniform doesn't get to call itself a company that values its passengers. Their termination isn't the point, though. It's the floor, not the ceiling. If all we do is fire 2 people and call it fixed, we'll be back in this room in 6 months with someone else's video going viral. He closed the folder in front of him and looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. I want a report on my desk by tomorrow morning. Not next week. Tomorrow I want the training program outlined, the audit scoped, and a public statement drafted that doesn't hide behind lawyers' language. If any of you think that's excessive, I'd like you to imagine sitting in that seat today, calm as you can manage, while a stranger decides out loud, in front of 40 people, that you don't belong in your own life. Nobody argued. 2 days later, Denise Coleman sat in a small conference room on the 14th floor, across the table from Marcus, alone except for Rachel standing quietly by the door. She looked smaller than she had on the plane. The crisp authority, gone out of her posture, replaced by something hollow and frightened. I want to understand, Marcus said, not unkindly. Not to punish you further. I've already made that decision, and it's done. I want to understand why. Denise was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. I don't have a good answer, she finally said. I told myself it was instinct. 17 years of doing this job. You learn to read people fast. You learn who's trouble and who isn't. That's what I told myself every single time. Her voice cracked. But instinct isn't supposed to look the same every time, is it? It's not supposed to always land on the same kind of person. Marcus said nothing, letting her sit inside that admission. I watched the video, she said. Someone sent it to me. I don't even know how many people have seen it by now. And I kept waiting to see the moment where I was justified, where something you did gave me a reason. And it's not there. It was never there. I decided the second you walked through that curtain, and everything after that was just me finding reasons to be right about a decision I'd already made. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in 3 days, Marcus said quietly. I'm not asking for my job back, Denise said. I know that's not. I know that's over. I just needed you to know that I understand what I did. Not what it cost me, what it cost you, what it's probably cost 14 other people I never even thought about until this week. Marcus studied her for a long moment. I'm not going to pretend this fixes anything, he said. It doesn't. But for whatever it's worth, this is the first time in this entire process that anyone involved has actually seen it. That matters. Not for your job. For whatever you do next, he stood, buttoning his jacket. The company's funding a real training program now. Independently run, not ours. If you ever want to go through it, not for a job, just for yourself, the door's open. That's the only door I've got for you. Denise nodded, eyes wet, and said nothing more. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood at a podium in the same terminal where the video had first started circulating, cameras arrayed in a wide half-circle in front of him, reporters crowded shoulder to shoulder. Behind him, on a large screen, the words Marine Atlantic. A new standard glowed in clean white letters. 3 weeks ago, Marcus began. A woman looked at me and decided, before I said a single word, that I didn't belong in the seat I'd paid for. She wasn't the first person at this company to make that decision about a passenger. She was just the first one who happened to be looking at the CEO when she made it. A ripple of quiet laughter, uneasy but genuine, moved through the room. "I'm not here today to tell you my airline is perfect," he continued. "It isn't. It never was, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. What I can tell you is what we're doing about it. Starting this month, every employee at Horizon Atlantic, every gate agent, every flight attendant, every executive, myself included, goes through a bias and accountability training program designed by an independent civil rights organization, not by us. We've opened an independent audit of every discrimination complaint filed against this company in the last 5 years, and where we can, we're reaching out to the people those complaints belonged to make it right." He paused, looking out over the room. "I built this company because I believe that a seat on a plane should mean exactly what it says. A seat paid for, earned, yours. Not something you have to prove you deserve every time someone decides you don't look like you belong there. We failed at that. I failed at that because I let it happen under my own name for longer than I should have. That changes now." A reporter in the second row raised a hand. "Mr. Reynolds, some critics are saying this is just a PR response to going viral. How do you answer that?" Marcus almost smiled. "I'd say the difference between a PR response and real change is whether it's still standing after the cameras leave. Come back in a year. Ask my employees. Ask my passengers. If nothing's different, you'll have every right to say, I was full of it." He stepped back from the podium as questions rippled up from the crowd, and Rachel appeared at his elbow, handing him his phone. On the screen was a message from an unknown number, forwarded by his assistant an hour earlier. He read it once, then read it again. "I was on that flight. I've been flying for years, and I've never once said anything when I saw someone treated the way you were treated, because I was scared it would become my problem too. Watching you refuse to move, it did something. I don't know what to call it, except courage. Thank you for not sitting down." Marcus closed the phone and slipped it into his pocket, and for the first time in 3 exhausting weeks, allowed himself something close to a breath of peace. The fight wasn't finished. It never really would be. Not in one company, not in one industry, not in one lifetime. But for one flight, in one seat, a man had refused to move, and the ground underneath an entire company had finally begun to shift. He walked out through the terminal doors into the cold Chicago evening, past the gates, past the departure boards ticking over with the names of cities all over the country, and for the first time in a long time, the seat he was walking toward felt exactly like what it had always been, his end.